Hello dear students, welcome you in this video. Today we are going to talk about language as a system of communication. We have made previous videos on language and we are continuing the series on linguistics. So here today we will talk about language as a system of communication. Before that, let's understand what kind of questions may be asked in your examinations. We are also covering the questions or these topics with the point of view of examination. So here first let's look at the questions. Here are three questions which are important and we are going to cover these questions in this video. Here you can see very first question is, what is system and communication? We will differentiate between system and communication because unless we understand what is system and communication as two separate things or elements, we do not understand language as a system of communication. So second question here we have, how is language system of communication? We will directly address that question and we will also talk about some of the features of language as system of communication. So here I have taken a few statements made by linguists and scholars and we will dissect those statements in this video. So let's start with the very first question, what is system? Now here you can see system is nothing but the interconnectedness of elements, or there are different types of components which work together. If you read this definition you will understand what is system, and we are talking about language as a system, or we will look at language with the point of view of system. So system is nothing but a set of interconnected or interdependent components or parts that work together to achieve a common purpose or function. These components interact with each other in a coordinated manner to produce specific outcomes or behaviors. Now it is very simple that when we talk about system, so system is nothing but the different types of components or different types of elements which work together. They are interconnected, they are interdependent, and they work together to form a complete or whole effect, or to work together. The very basic thing here you can understand that produce specific outcome or behavior. So specific outcome or specific result is achieved through these elements or through these components. So we will think in English language or any language as system of communication. So this is the system, means there are different types of elements involved in a system, and when we think about language as a system we find that language also have different elements, different components. For example, here we have 5 domains of language. There are so many domains, but here I have listed only 5 major domains to understand language as a system. Here very first you can see that there is phonology, morphology, then we have syntax, we have semantics and pragmatics. All these elements are different, all these parts are different, all these parts are we can say these domains are different, but they work together to form the same effect, the form or to achieve common goal, to achieve common result. So these are the parts of language, and hence we can say that very simply language as a system or language as a system of communication. Now second term here we have communication. And what is communication? It's very simple. Communication is nothing but the exchange of meaning, exchange of ideas, exchange of emotions, exchange of messages. So this communication may happen between groups or between individuals or between individual and groups. Here you can understand it is nothing but exchanging information. So a person conveys the message and the next person or the listener understands that message and he responds to. So this exchange is called as communication. Now there are different types of methods and mediums of communication. Basically communication can be divided into two broad categories: verbal communication and non-verbal communication. What happens in verbal communication? We use language for the communication, and in non-verbal communication we use symbols, or we use signs, we use gestures So there are different types of non-verbal communication. Here we can very clearly understand that. So verbal and non-verbal cues, such as here we have spoken word, means we are using language. Written language, we are again using language, but in the form of text, in the form of written language. We also use body language, which is part of non-verbal communication. Then we use facial expressions, gestures, visual cues to convey meaning and understanding. So for example, I am speaking over here and you are listening to me, and I am not only using the language, the words or the text to convey the message, but I am also using the gestures, I am also using these type of mediums to convey the message, to make you understand what we are studying, what we are discussing. So all these elements together work to form the common result, and we have a very common result of all these elements. So verbal and non-verbal communication. So this is nothing but the part of communication. Now we understood what is system, we understood what is communication. Now language as a system of communication. Next we have some of the statements that directly talk about language as a system. Here we have very first John Lyons, and he talks language as a system in a very particular way. Let's read the statement. A language system is social phenomena. Very first he says that it is nothing but a social phenomena or institution which of itself is purely abstract, in that it has no physical existence, but which is a actualized on particular occasion in the language behavior of individual members of the language community. So this is this statement is made by John Lyons, and you can find this statement in this book Language and Linguistics, an introduction by John Lyons. Now John Lyons talks about language as a system, but it is a social phenomena, it is a social system. Why? Because we people use language, we have text, we have verbal or oral language, and hence he calls it as social phenomena. And it is not only a phenomena, social phenomena, but a social institution. So language also comprises the parts of institution or elements of institution. So it is a social institution. Then it is an abstract entity. So say for example, I am speaking to you and you are listening to me. Everything is abstract, my words are abstract, but the sound you can hear, this sound can be actualized, or this behavior can be felt. So this is a very particular behavior of language, and in this way it becomes an abstract entity. But though it is an abstract entity, it can be felt, it can be actualized, and you are listening to me, this is the actualization, this is the feeling of language. So it is a social institution according to John Lyons. And next he says that the behavior of individual members of the language community. Now we have particular language community. Say for example, we are speaking English, so we forms an English community who uses English. So you have Hindi as your native language, then you have Hindi speaking community, you have Marathi speaking community, you have Tamil speaking community. So particular community speaks particular language. So language can be restricted to a community. So we can say that this community speaks this language, and in this way we can mark that language as a system. So these things are very crucial when we think about language or when we study about language as a system. So remember all these things. Next statement here we have by M.A.K. Halliday, and here we have two statements by M.A.K. Halliday. Very first he says that language needs to be studied holistically and comprehensively with triangular perspective, bottom up, top down, and within around. So language cannot be studied in separately, or it has different elements. It should be studied holistically. Means there are so many things, there are so many elements which affect the language. As in the previous statement we said that it is a social phenomena, a social institution. So language should be studied in society, studied in particular community. So it should be studied holistically, and he has given the approach to study language, top down, bottom up, and within around. This triangular perspective is important. What is top down? Top down means we can consider language from the top. So there are different levels of language, and we can dissect all those levels in this trinocular view, or in these three parts. Next statement is made by Halliday again, and he says that it is probabilistic system of choices. Now language gives you choice, the choice of words, choice of statements, choice of vocabulary, choice of syntax, choice of grammar, choice of different elements which are discussed in the language. So it is probabilistic choices. So an individual can use language as per his need, as per his view, as per his we can say that competence in that particular language. So it is related to choices. So what kind of words do we choose to speak or to communicate, to convey our message? So again, this thing we need to consider in language when we think about as a system. Next we have here a statement made by J.R. Firth. And what did J.R. Firth say? He says language is system of systems and text is always a process, a continuous instantiation. This statement is also important. So far as we talked language as system, but here J.R. Firth says that it is system of systems, means there are systems embedded in the language. When we consider a component of language, for example, we have vocabulary. So vocabulary again have different types of elements embedded in it. When we talk about phonology or sound system, it has also different systems included in that particular phonology or phonetics. So this can be considered as system of systems, because it just rotates all the systems. How? Because language is embedded in society or in culture, and culture is a different system, society is a different system. So this is related to language, and these systems hence can be called as system of systems. When we use language, we are using system of systems, because language reflects culture, language reflects society, language reflect individual characteristics or individual traits, and hence it can be called as system of systems. Next statement we have L.M. Slave, and he says that language is a system and process. As in the previous statements we talked about language as system or system of systems. Again he says that it is system and process. Now what is process? Process is nothing but the continuous action. Whatever there is, it is in the continuous action or in continuous mode. So language is continuous or continuity, because language is flexible and an individual can use language as per his or her need and as per his competence in that particular language. So these statements are important. L.M. Slaves. Next we have by Roma Jacobson, and Roma Jacobson says language and literature cannot be separated. Now again we have entering in another system, the system of literature. So there is ample research on language and literature, and Roma Jacobson says that language and literature cannot be separated, because literature uses language and language reflects that particular literature and different types of traits of that particular literature. Hence a literary person or an author must know about language, or he must possess the competence in language. Next we are going to understand some of the terms like competence, then we have langue, parole and performance. These four terms are important in the system of communication or in the system of language. So literature and language cannot be separated, because literature has the traits of language and language has the traits of literature, and an author must be competent in language. So this statement is important here. Again we have a scholar of applied linguistics and applied translation, Bhimrao Bhosle, who worked in or taught in University of Hyderabad, and he says that central core of culture is institution and language is most important institution, especially social institutions. Again we have the same kind of opinion or statement made by Dr. Bhimrao Bhosle, and he says that the central core of culture is institution, and and language is an important institution. So here we can understand the layers of language as a system. So culture and language are inseparable. Culture reflects, language reflects the culture. Whatever kind of culture a community has, it is reflected through language. For example, when we speak in dialect, so dialect are highly culturally embedded, or we can say that dialect reflects the particular culture, or dialect reflects that native culture of a particular community. So it is an institution, social institution, especially because society, language and culture are inseparable and they need to be studied holistically, or with interconnectedness. So they have interconnections among them. So this is by Dr. Bhimrao Bhosle. Next we have the terms which are very important while thinking language as a system or system of communication. Here we have two terms proposed by Noam Chomsky. Very first, competence. Competence is nothing but the knowledge of language. How are you competent in that particular language? Means when you study language, you study these kind of elements, or you study the competence in that particular language. For example, you study the syntax of language, the grammar of language, the vocabulary of language, the meaning components of language, semantics or pragmatics or different elements in the language, and you study basically the rules of language. And if you have competence in that language, you can use that language very skillfully. For example, an author can use language very skillfully when he or she has competence in that particular language. The second term here we have performance. Now performance is nothing but the actual presentation of language, actual use of language. How do you use language? For example, I am using English in a very simple way, and this is the performance in English. So competence is different and performance is different. Performance is actual use of language, actual presentation of language. Next we have two terms, Langue and parole, proposed by Ferdinand de Saussure. And here what is Langue? Langue and competence are related terms, or they have similarity. So Langue again is nothing but underlying structures and rules of a language, with a grammar, vocabulary, phonology, etc. Again the same things are here, underlying structures, underlying rules. So a language has Langue. Langue means the rules of that particular language, or the particular structure, means syntax, we have semantics, we have meaning, different types of components of that language, elements of that language. Basically we study rules here in the Langue. And parole again is like performance. So actual use or individual use of language, how do we use language, is related to parole. So here we can find that it refers to the flexibility of language or choices of language, because we use language as per our choice. We choose vocabulary, we choose words, we choose different types of elements in the language. And parole is nothing but again individual use of language, how an individual, a person uses language. So this is by Ferdinand de Saussure. Now we will think about how all these elements are comprised as a system of communication. So here when we study language, we generally study these different kinds of elements. For example, we study syntax, we study grammar, we study phonology and phonetics, we study semantics and pragmatics, morphology, we study language as a behavior, stylistics, etc. So all these things, all these elements comprise language as a system of communication. So these things must be included in your answer when you write answer, language as a system of communication. Now this each part or each section or each domain has again subdomains, subsections and sub elements embedded in these things. So when we think about syntax, we think about the rules of structure. For example, English comprises the very basic structure, subject, verb and object. Marathi again a different structure, Hindi again a different structure, then we have Tamil a different structure. So when we think about the syntax or the elements of language, we are generally talking about the rules. Then we talk about the rules of grammar. Then we have phonology or phonetics. Phonetics is a scientific study of sound system. So phonology is nothing but sound system. We do study sound system. So semantics or pragmatics study meaning. So how do you convey meaning? How meaning is conveyed through particular elements using language. So pragmatics takes care of the contextual meaning, semantics takes care of the meaning. Then we have morphology. Again, this is also related to structure or morphemes. Then we have language behavior. As we have seen that language is rooted in society and in culture, and hence we should think language as a behavior, because Roma Jakobson says that as the child grows, his language capacity also grows. So the development of a child takes place with the development of language. So this is by Roma Jakobson, and he thinks that it is a behavior. So language is a particular behavior. Then again we have stylistics, how individuals use language, what kind of styles do use authors or poets or writers in their writing. So it is studied in the stylistics. So all these elements comprises language as a system of communication. I hope you got the complete understanding of all these elements. So basically you need to understand first system, then communication, and language as communication. We have used so many statements to support the view language as a system of communication. I hope you got. If you have any problem, any query, you can directly comment below in the comment section. We will answer your queries or your problems. So thank you very much for watching the complete video. Let's meet in the next video.